So Arpin, as you know, we have, our brethren throughout the league has its favorite spots to go have a beer, right? When you're in a certain town, when you're South Florida, you're in Fort Lauderdale, everybody goes to Elbow Room.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in Toronto, you go to Scotland Yard. When you're in Tampa, you go to Hat Tricks. In Montreal, I think that the place we could argue that it's Hurley's, right?
Hurley's or Ziggy's,
right? Yeah,
there's Hurley's and Ziggy's are the two front runners in Montreal. Yeah,
right. So on Sunday, now you are in Calgary right now, but on Sunday it's going to be St. Patrick's Day, and you're going to be in Edmonton then, and the Sherlock Holmes, the Sherlock Holmes pub is certainly one of the main stops for NHL riders, so it's a good place to be on St. Patrick's Day.
I'll probably be there. The Canadiens are off on Sunday, so if I had to make a prediction, at some point Sunday, I will be at that pub, enjoying St. Patrick's Day
for sure. My prediction is that you won't be alone.
Yes. Probably not. But I will check that out, and so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, but in the meantime, we are Friday. This is the Basu and Godin Notebook. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us. A bit of a later entry than usual, but you had to travel today, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Hey, before we discuss what will happen, let's turn back to what happened last night against Boston, and more specifically, I mean, in overtime, Mike Matheson made a very questionable decision of trying to make a play by himself, 1 against 3, ended up, falling on all fours in the corner, created a turnover, and it led to Boston winning the game just, 24 seconds into overtime. So I think it shows the fact that he goes on the ice right at the beginning of overtime, considering his skill set, is just normal. He logs a ton of ice time, but he's also prone to that sort of blunders. So when you look at all the good that he brings, plus the bad that you have to deal with, how do you balance out his contribution? Because when you look at the stats, there are some aspects of his game that suggest that he's having a very difficult season, but other aspects where you say, and the eye test, for example, and his overall contribution to the team, you recognize that by default, he's the Montreal Canadiens' first number one defenseman. So where do you sit on that?
Well, I think, he explained his decision in overtime as, I saw a forward in front of me, one-on-one. I decided to take that chance and try and create something because they were, I saw a lane to the net. I think what makes him good is that attitude, that kind of fearlessness. It's been a career-long struggle for Mike Matheson to toe that line between aggression and recklessness. It's always been difficult for him. He, as he should, has an extreme belief in his feet and his ability to make plays, ability to beat people with his feet. His feet are exceptional, so I think he should feel that way. But it does get him into trouble sometimes. And what I find unfortunate about Matheson is that the times it gets him into trouble seem to lead to such egregious errors that it almost balances out all the good that he does. Like all the little good things he does over the course of the game get kind of, I don't want to say erased, but they get the counterpoint to them is that one or two big mistake he'll make in a game. And a lot of them have to do with his risk management and his judgment. And listen, if I were coaching Matheson on that play and he gave me the explanation that he gave us last night, I don't know how upset I'd be, because it's true that if you only see a forward between you and the goalie, for you to believe that you could beat that forward and get to the net and score, is not completely unreasonable. I think on that play, another guy who was a bit at fault there was Cole Caulfield, kind of not realizing he had very little chance of recovering that puck. So when he dove in to try and maintain possession, that was a situation where he had to see Matheson was on the ground, make the proper read, and peel back, not try and go in.
It's like not covering for a pinch, right? So
basically, yeah. So and 3-on-3 especially. I mean, if once Matheson takes that risk, which is questionable to do, which is a questionable decision, 100%. You have to recognize that he's fallen. But that risk, every time Marty St. Louis asked about Mike Matheson, he mentions how his risk management has gotten better.
Yeah.
When you talk to Mike Matheson himself, he'll talk about how his risk management has gotten better. But it still rears its head every now and then where he sees an opportunity, he sees a lane, he thinks he can get through there, he thinks he can beat a guy, and he doesn't. And I think if you took that away from him, yes, you might eliminate those big mistakes, but you're going to eliminate a lot of good that come from that same attitude at the same time. So it's tricky. It's tough. It's tough to. I don't know what I would suggest he do, because I like that about him. That he looks up, sees a forward, sees the goalie behind him, and says, "Okay, I'm going to go beat this guy and score." I like that.
Yeah, it's funny because I heard Darryl Belfry on another podcast recently, and he said that the challenging thing with young teams that are struggling is that when every time you make a mistake and it goes in the back of your net, which we've heard Canadiens players say at times this year, it sort of kills a part of your instinct and in favor of conservatism, because you don't want you're going to make sure in order not to get scored against it, you might disconnect yourself a little bit from the natural instincts that will help you produce. And to your point, I think that Matheson, being one of the older players on this team, has not let his instincts be parked in favor of conservatism and in favor of making sure that any mistake would not get in the back of their net. And I'm not his decision making and his risk taking. I feel, he might have improved, but there are still spots on the ice where he's still vulnerable to turnovers. I think that generally speaking, the neutral zone between the red line and the offensive blue line, I think he's fairly good at it. The blue line on the power play, there's been a lot of misuse there that led to, unmanned rushes and power play goals against. In the corners also, when on defense, he might be vulnerable to turnovers there. But I'm not sure if it's just if it's really giving him a whole lot of a help or service to play him that much. And if it was maybe that his risk management would be compounded or would be managed better if instead of playing 26 minutes a night, he was playing 21. So there's also a factor of being exposed constantly to top opposition, to be used a ton night after night. And at some point, it's a mental game too. And it's when we talk about decision making, if you're playing a lot and he's got an amazing cardio, the guy has he's the fittest player on the team.
Yes.
But mentally, I wonder if there's also, not just physically, but mentally also, if there's not a sweet spot where a player could be comfortable playing, and beyond that, you become more mistake prone just because it's a lot of workload.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about his minutes is a lot of them come on the power play, right?
Mm-hmm. PK too, though. He's got
PK too. That's it. They come on special teams. He's one of the top players in the league in terms of power play minutes. I'm just looking at it here. He's 18th in the NHL in power play minutes per game. But on this list, no one plays on the PK as much as he does out of anyone in the top 20, top 25. He's the only one. The only one who comes close is Joel Eriksson at 228 per game. And Cale Makar at 246 per game. Matheson's at 258 per game. So you're looking at almost 7 minutes a game on special teams. His even strength ice time is fine. It's those minutes that you wonder how those catch up to him. And when you look at, and when you mention, would he be better served playing less? He's another example of a player who is playing a role based on need, based on the lack of that player existing. Caden Gooley playing on the right side with Mike Matheson, based on need, based on lacking a player they feel can do that, which I don't think it's hindering his development, but it's not great. And the Gooley Matheson pairing have been tasked with facing tons of tough opposition, and especially teams that have like two potent lines. What the Canadiens tend to do is they try to get Savard and Jacky out with the top line and have Gooley and Matheson matched up with whatever that other big line is. Like I remember the game in Tampa, every time they threw the fourth line over the boards, Gooley and Matheson were behind them because they knew that Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov and Steven Stamkos, or some combination of the top players on Tampa's side, were coming over to face that fourth line. So they have found themselves often in situations where they don't have an ideal matchup up front, and they are the insurance for that matchup. That's more particularly on the road. But, when you face a team like Boston last night, which line do you choose to put your big guns against? The forwards, the Suzuki line played mostly against the Pasternak line with Zacha and Heinen. The Marchand line, therefore, got the easier forward matchup, but I think more often than not, I didn't check the minutes at the end of the game, but just from recollection, that Marchand line got a lot of Matheson and Gooley. So it's there's a lot of context to Matheson's numbers. I think his insane amount of ice time is one of them. His matchups is another. But it's just a weird, his eye test not matching the numbers. I think there's the truth is somewhere in between. Yes, he has poor underlying numbers. You watch him play; he's an impactful player. But I can't help but think over these last 16 games, that maybe getting Gooley some time away from Matheson might not be so bad. If you're going to play, they have, they're lacking right shot D right now, but like you could still put a right side of, say, Savard, Kovacevic, Harris, and have a left side of Matheson, Gooley, and Jacky. And I know Struble would kind of get, but frankly, I think Struble, they might consider sending him to Laval soon. So it's really
they seem to be preparing that. Yeah.
Well, he got papered, right? He was the only one who was the only other one who got papered, and his ice time has been sort of dwindling of late. So, I would like to see a decent stretch here where let's see what Gooley looks like away from Matheson. Mm-hmm. And not to say to give him easier minutes or give him easier matchups, but I thought Gooley was amazing in that game against Boston. I thought he had a really, really good game. He had a couple of miscues kind of midway through the game, but generally just a really solid game from him again, and was activating more offensively than he usually does. Because that's the other thing about playing with Matheson is that Gooley can't do that stuff. Yeah, because Matheson's always doing that stuff, and Gooley can do that stuff. They kind of need to get him to use his mobility to create offensively. It's always been the knock on him, and it's always been the doubt of his ceiling is what can he do offensively, and playing him with Matheson is a disservice. He seems
to recognize situations. Oh, here I could go. But yeah, he has to he has to put on the brakes if he's playing with Matheson, and they've been guilty of that, of both of them at the circle, each on their side. So leaving the back exposed. So you cannot, even if let's say certain situations, Gouli would be in his right mind to try to chip in and be that fourth man up. If Matheson decides to go too, well, there's nobody in the back. So it didn't happen against Boston, but it's sure that happened since they've been playing together. But it's you're right when you say that it's these situations are born out of the lack of the proper personnel. That those are, they're prime examples. Both Matheson and Gouli in each in their own way. But you want to get, let's say you would like to reduce the minutes from Matheson and start with the PK. The Canadiens don't have a lot of PK specialists. Imagine they traded Savard. Because so you're down to Gouli. I still think that ultimately they have to groom. They have. This is a good situation for them at the end of the season to say, okay, let's start developing Jack-Eye in that situation.
Exactly. Yes, 100%.
And you look in the pipeline. I think that Reinbacher is going to be a fine defensive defenseman, but they're not full of defensive stalwarts. Mayu, Hudson, guys like that are primarily offensive minded. Same for Engstrom. So it's going to be. I'm curious to see if the Canadiens, whether it's after Savard has left Montreal or even before, if an addition could come in the form of a seasoned defenseman that is especially astute in the defensive part of the game. I wouldn't be surprised if they decided to invest money in there.
Well, that's if they trade Savard in the offseason, but I think if they let Savard just play out his contract, which frankly I would be tempted to do. If they hoped, if they hope that they're going to be mildly competitive next season, by that time Gouli's their guy. Hell, I would say that right now Gouli's their guy. Gouli, to me, is their best defensive player. To me, you look at him, and Savard is obviously great at what he does, but
he doesn't have the mobility to do what he wants to do.
Obviously, he doesn't have the mobility, and also I was talking to a pro scout about him, prior to the deadline, just trying to get different opinions on him, and one of them mentioned how he cheats for shot blocks. So, he'll get in the shooting lanes, but he'll go down and he will leave seam passes open as a result. He will leave there are other things that you can do when you know that Savard is going to go down on one knee and get in that shooting lane. And all you have to do is do a little fake and he's going to do that. Then things open up for you. And so he pointed that out and I started watching for it and I was like, okay, yeah. And then, I saw him at the next intermission. He's like, you see that? And I was like, yeah. And so, listen, everyone has their limitations or their faults, and this is not a big one for Savard, but I think in Gouli's case, in terms of his well-roundedness and his mobility and his physicality and his instincts and his reads, I really think he's already the best defensive player on the team, and he's only 22.
Yeah, so, I would agree with that. Just finishing with regarding Matheson, I know you and I are not in love with the plus minus statistic because it can be a proof of you just playing on a bad team, playing a lot on a bad team. So the more you play, the more in the minus you might end up. But I think it was only last year that Suzuki was minus 21 at the end of the season, or was it 2 years ago? But now Matheson's at minus 27, and he's on pace to break Patrice Brisebois and Alex Galchenyuk's record of minus 31 if things continue that way, which would not be great. So I don't know.
Could there be two more appropriate record holders than He's what? And Alex Galchenyuk in the plus minus category.
Well, I know
that would be a group I would not want to join if I were Mike Matheson.
No, exactly. So I mean, there are other guys. I mean, Suzuki was certainly not in that territory. But again, I mean, Brisebois was the sort of guy that you could say also that he did a lot of good little things, and ultimately one or two big mistakes were costly, and that's all you remember. You remembered at the end.
That's true. It's actually very similar in that way. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, he just didn't put up points ever the way that Matheson has been putting up points for the Canadiens this year. That's a big difference. But I mean, when you look at I
think he had a couple of pretty productive seasons. Did he not?
Yeah, he ended up. Yeah, more often than not, he ended up being more like in the 30s. I'm not sure if he ever.
No, he had 37, 30, 38 was actually with his career high in points came with the Colorado Avalanche.
There you go.
Who would have guessed that?
That's towards the end of his career.
Colorado Avalanche in 2005-06, at which point he was 34. That's wild. I never knew that.
And that's the year of all the floodgates open for everybody. So
yeah.
05,
a lot of offense, especially if you played on the power play, was very helpful. But still, his career high in points with 38 with the Colorado Avalanche. That's crazy. Yeah. But yeah, one year he scored 15 goals with the Canadiens, 2001. Ooh, remember that team? That was the first team I covered.
that was the first
team. That was my entry into the NHL reporting circles. Was that 2001 team where Patrice Brisebois had 15 goals and 21 assists? But that was quite the team. Craig Darby, baby.
That was painful. That's the record setting. I mean, 2000, 2001, right?
2000, 2001. Eric Landry was on that team.
Yeah.
Craig Darby.
Well, there you
Kilger.
go.
I think Zubris got traded that year. Patrick Poulet, who I think we were discussing it at the game last night. Juha Lind. Xavier Delille played 14 games on that team. Patrick Traverse. Aaron Asham. PJ Stock was on that team. Christian Flam, remember him? Holy cow. He was David Savard before there was a David Savard. No offense to David Savard. Christian Flam was
it is an offense to David Savard. It is.
It is. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah. But you see, Patrice Brisebois was one of the only guys who played the whole year, and that's the season where he finishes minus 31.
It is.
Horrendous.
It is, yeah. So it was also his career high in goals that year. So it's kind of, you take the good with the bad. Like, that's the thing. Like, you get it's funny. We did not plan this, but it's the similarities are there. Like Patrice Brisebois always struggled with when to take risks and he always seemed to choose the wrong time to take a risk. I don't think Mike Matheson is quite in the same category, but it's very similar in that sense. And that was his age 29 season too, which is exactly what this is for Mike Matheson. So.
I remember Patrice Brisebois. Patrice Brisebois would have sometimes his passes picked off.
Yep.
That's how he would create turnovers. Whereas Matheson skates until he finds an open lane for passing. So he doesn't have an issue carrying the puck.
Yeah. Well, he skates into trouble more often than he passes into trouble. Whereas Brisebois just had no peripheral vision. Like he just could not. He just didn't see people. Because he would see his teammate, but it was just a very narrow tunnel that he would see, and whoever was outside that tunnel, he didn't see. So, he gave up a lot of pucks that way.
So I like when I focus on a Canadiens player at this point in time, at this point of the season, I like to think, what can we hope for, or what can he expect from this guy down the stretch? So I'll ask you the question when it comes to Mike Matheson. 17 games left to the season. What would you like to see from him?
16 games left.
16? There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
What would I like to see from him? I mean, I think I'd just like to see him. I'd like to see him, honestly, not change. At this point, I don't see what the point is. I think the context is going to change next season, and they can they can address that. They can address anything they want to address with him can be addressed going into next season. At this point, try to get to 50 points. He's only 3 away. I think it's pretty clear he's going to get there. Try to get to maybe 60 points. If you can get 13 points in his last 16 games, maybe you could do that. I don't know. Did you get a point last night?
That'd be wacky.
If you got to 60 points,
man,
that'd be incredible.
Imagine
but
that.
It would take a big finish, but I don't think it's very likely. But still, I would just be like, listen, just keep doing what you're doing. I mean, there's again, it's. I think Marty and the coaching staff and Stefan Robida are in a tight spot because they don't want to take that away from Mike Matheson, because that's what makes him good.
Yeah,
is that willingness to push the envelope, that willingness to take those risks. It takes a special kind of confidence in yourself to do that. Mike Matheson has that; he's always had it.
I would argue that he didn't always have it. Earlier in his career, he got some serious confidence, bumps.
Well, he lost it.
Yeah.
He definitely lost it in Florida because he was getting burned so often. But he originally had it. I mean, that's why he was getting burned. It's because he was trying things that he couldn't get away with in the NHL that he constantly got away with. I mean, I remember I covered him in midget. I wrote a story about him when he was 15, I think, playing for the Lac St. Louis Lions. And he was insane to watch back then. Like, he just, far and away the best skater on the ice and could just skate circles around people. And that's what he grew up doing. He grew up just out skating everyone. And you get to the NHL and you have to realize that you're not going to be able to do that. And it took him a while to realize that. But there's still that little bit of that is in him, and he needs that. Without that, he's a very, I don't want to say average, but he's not the same player. And I guess you could make the argument that he needs to stop being that same player, but I kind of like that about him. I kind of like the gambler side of him, but it needs to be surrounded properly. And so, I don't think Gouli's the right player to surround him, because I think it's holding Gouli back. Gouli has 15 points in 61 games. It's not ideal for him. I mean, it's he
one day he'll have.
I think everyone kind of. Yeah, I think that would have been fair to expect, and or even I mean, last season he had 18 points in 44 games, so same amount of goals. So it'd be nice for Caden Gouli's sake to if there's someone that I'd like to see something from now to the end of the season, it's him. And I'd like to see him removed from Matheson and be told, start doing some of the stuff Matheson does. Not all of it. Don't go crazy. But some of it, get a bit more of that into your game. And we understand you can't do that playing with Matheson. So here, we're going to give you Kovacevic or Savard or whoever. We're going to give you someone who's going to be more steady on your right. Go and let's see what you could do offensively from now till the end of the season. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, so you would need to have both Kovacevic and Harris on the right side at the same time in order for that to happen, right? You would like to move him back to the left.
I would like to move Gouli to the left. Yeah, well, I mean, Kovacevic would be on the right naturally. Yeah, you'd have to have Harris as it'd be a Savard, Kovacevic, Harris right side. And I mean, the issue is that, then Strubal's out. But again, as you mentioned, it's not the end. I mean, I think he's benefited from his rookie season in the NHL. And I think to see Gouli get that time and get that, not only a green light, but like the encouragement to go out and let's see what you can do. Let's push it offensively a little bit with you. Let's see what we can get. Let's see what happens. I'd be interested in that.
Yeah. I think that Gouli Harris could be an interesting pair for down the stretch. Could do that because Harris is responsible. Kovacevic creates more turnovers on average than any defenseman on the Canadiens roster. But Harris is responsible, and he's another very good skater. I'd be curious to try. That'd be good. Hey, we spoke earlier about confidence, and there's one guy that shows a lot of confidence right now, more than we've ever seen. We discussed his case a few weeks ago, but I think it bears, putting him on this under the spotlight again, and it's Joël Armia.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so happy for the guy right now, knowing that it's been such a struggle throughout the years. It's like having a new player for the Canadians. That you found a guy like it's almost like you open a door and that's another player. Hey, come play with us, and it's because it's a different Joël Armia, and he seems so relieved that he could unlock this aspect of himself. But what the player that we would see once every 15 games now is that guy 2 games out of 3, which is a game changer for his own career.
Absolutely. And he was named second star of the game against Boston. Kudos to I think it's TVA. I think it's whoever the broadcaster is that chooses the stars. So kudos to TVA for getting it right for once, because they don't have a good batting average in terms of picking the stars. But getting Joël Armia, I think, on this night was very good, on a night where he didn't produce a point. He didn't really, didn't do anything spectacular, but had a number of shifts where he was just all over the ice, just making plays, stealing pucks, getting pucks back. Canadians 5-on-5 shot attempts against Boston with Joël Armia on the ice was 20-6.
Yeah.
I mean, its shots on goal were 7-2. Like, it's just dominance, and like expected goals were 70%. Like, it's just like the numbers fly off the page for the game this guy had. And I was talking to him after the game. Well, actually, you know what? I had no intention of talking to him after the game, but I think because he was named a star, the Canadiens PR staff asked him to come out. And when he was out there, I was like, oh, well, I'm going to go talk to Joël Armia. You don't get this opportunity every day, And so, and I brought, like, it's because he's rarely in there. And I brought up he had a 1 penalty killing shift. Like, it was the second half of Suzuki's double minor, the high sticking double minor.
Oh yeah.
And he came on the ice, like off the bench, and pretty much single-handedly killed 30 seconds of that penalty, something like that. It was remarkable. It was just like a series of positive actions that only a player who's feeling it, who's feeling good, and Marty keeps mentioning how good what a good mental space he's in, and we don't need to like rehash that. That's now fact. He's made it so that we can take that for granted, that he's in a good mental space. But just in terms of what he does as a hockey player, like, we're finally seeing what everyone always saw in this guy. I mean, this is the culmination of all his tools happening, and it's pretty telling, like, he was happy about the way the team played last night. He was happy to be named a star. I think he was even happy to be asked to talk to reporters, frankly, but was upset that all those chances that he and his line mates created, none of them went in. And he thought that with the game that they played, with the pressure that they put on, and him in particular, that they could have made a difference in that game. And he was upset that they didn't. And that's a good sign. I think that's a sign of him getting those kind of, like, the competitive juices are there, but not in a detrimental way. Like, it used to be that those competitive juices were what was holding him back and making him so bogging him down mentally. Whereas now they're an accent to what he's doing. He was able to talk about it and be upset about it, but not be killing himself over it, and not be like, wow, I really sucked tonight. I really this, that. No, he's like, I played a really good game. Just, we had some chances. I had some chances. I could have made a difference if one of them went in. It's really sucks that we didn't win the game, and it really sucks that I could have made that difference, but I thought I had a really good game. Perfect.
All right. I'll come back to that in a second, but I just wanted to point out that on RDS, Bruno Gervais isolated a sequence in the second period where Armia orchestrated a whole sequence in the offensive zone where he had puck protection, puck protection along the boards. He won a battle along the boards. Then great puck protection. He had a move also to get rid of a defender, gave himself some space to pass the puck. Twice in a span of maybe 20 seconds, he had like seam passes in the slot that culminated into scoring chances. He had his own shot attempt that missed the net, which unfortunately was the case a few times for him last night. But he was so dominant. So when a player like that showing confidence becomes the sum of all of his parts, then it brings that player to just a different level. It's just that it's so unusual that somebody figures it out so late in his career. I remember that Sean Burke mentioned that he, as a goalie, figured out some stuff just too late in his career because he figured them out at a time where his physical ability had started to fail him. But if the things that he had figured out and was able to put together, and he had figured those things out during his physical prime, then he could have reached, the level of goaltending that everybody thought that he would be capable of, when he first arrived in the league. So that's a little bit what I'm thinking when I think of Joël Armia, because he's not an old guy. He's 30 years old, or he's maybe
he'll be 31,
29.
He'll be 31 at the end of May.
Okay, yeah. So he's 30.
Yeah, he's 30.
But he doesn't. You look like him. You look at him. He doesn't strike you as a guy who's got a ton of mileage on his body, he still seems to have a lot of hockey left in him. Mm-hmm. So I won't start a campaign like some fans who would say, "Oh, if he's like that, let's sign him to another contract." No. To me, that's don't burn yourself. Yeah. But it's just I'm just cheering for him to say, if you're in a good spot, just stay for your own sake. Just stay in that zone. That's good, and it will make at least the last year of his contract decent for the Canadiens. If he plays like that next season, it'll be worth his money. And if the Canadiens are out of the playoff picture at the same time next year, he will have a trade value that this year he didn't have, and possibly all the years before either.
Yeah, and the big thing is that he's already done this. He's already accomplished this. He has completely changed his place in the organization. Before even arriving at training camp last season, the Canadiens had already decided that Joël Armia was going to go to Laval. See, there was no chance of him making the team, even though he didn't have a great camp, but still, it wasn't awful.
They used the excuse of an injury that slowed him down.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. Like he wasn't great, but it was clear that he needed to play his way out of that end result in training camp. Like the bar, as opposed to losing a job, he had to win back a job in training camp. And so now, I don't think that's going to be the case going into training camp next season. He's going to arrive and they have this as the expectation, as the bar, and just knowing, what a good organizational guy he's been. He went down to Laval. He scored 6 goals in 8 games in two stints there, and got nothing but rave reviews from the coaching staff down there. Just everything. He was very not happy to be there, but didn't sulk, didn't complain, did everything he was asked to do, played like any other player on the team would. And so not only has he changed his own status going to training camp, I agree with you, the Canadiens shouldn't necessarily extend him right away, but he has definitely made it conceivable that he's going to get himself another contract in the NHL. I mean, he'll be 31 when his contract expires, or no, he'll be 32 when his contract expires in July of 2025. So, signing another 2 or 3 year deal, if he plays like this again, because I don't think what he does on the ice is not super dependent on his physical skills. He's not a super fast skater. Yes, he's physically, he uses his body extremely well, but that won't change with age. You only get better at that with age. There's nothing in Joël Armia's game that I feel will age out. And so I think if he puts together another season, I think he can get himself one more nice NHL contract, whether that's Montreal or elsewhere. And it's a good story. It's fun to see. Definitely a nice story for a guy who we don't know a whole lot about, because he's just he's a tough nut to crack, so it's yeah. But I enjoy the challenge of trying to crack that nut sometimes. I do enjoy the challenge of trying to break his shell. I loved Caden Primo saying on Saturday night that, I like to listen more than I like to talk, but there's a shell that you have to crack to get to the real me. I was like, challenge accepted. I'm going to crack that shell. And Joël Armia has always had a tough shell to crack to get to know him.
Yeah. But he had his own, I think it was hard for himself too.
Yeah.
But I mean, that version of Joël Armia, if that was to continue next season, I want that guy on my third line next year.
Next year, for sure. It's just the year after that you got to, and frankly,
right.
I don't know.
No,
I know. The year after,
I mean, it's we're talking 95 games away, so I won't get carried away. But all I'm saying is that if he could just transfer whatever he's figured out in the last couple of months, if it can carry over to next year, that'd be great for the Canadiens. It'd be great for his career. Mm-hmm. But that iteration of Joël Armia, I like that.
Yeah, sure.
I think the
Canadiens like it too. So speaking,
but he said, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just, speaking of players the Canadiens like, and someone who's making it difficult is Armia's line mate, Joshua Roy. And so Joshua Roy is on this trip. He's in Calgary as we speak with me, somewhere in the same city. He's not with me in my hotel room. He's in the same city as me. But I'm somewhat surprised that he is on this trip. He had another really strong game against Boston, so I'm not surprised in that sense. But I am surprised in the sense that this is a 12-day trip that the Canadiens are on. Thankfully, I'm not on the entire trip, but still, it's a long trip. They're far away. Nothing's stopping them from sending Joshua Roy back at any given time, but he's here. And Laval is on a bit of a run, and maybe that's what made this decision easier, is that Laval's winning some games. I think they're playing tonight, if I'm not mistaken. So this is we're recording this prior to their game that's going on as we speak, actually. So, but still, they're on a bit of a run, so that's going to help. But they have a huge game coming up on Sunday at Toronto. Massive implications. They need to catch the Marlies, and the Marlies are holding down the last playoff spot. Laval's one spot back. That game's on Sunday. I don't see how Joshua Roy could play in that game if he's playing in Calgary on Saturday. And so I would have thought that they would have wanted Joshua Roy in that game. It's a huge game, and so I'm a little surprised.
Yeah, they're going after that game against the Marlies. They'll have 4 days. They're going to come back to Laval and have some rest and train in Laval. Maybe that there's going to be sort of a transition there. A couple of things. First off, it's not the first time. It would not be the first time that the Canadiens bring a guy on the road only to send him back like the day after.
Christ, and, Jordan Harris.
Jordan
Harris flew all the way to California only to fly all the way back home 1 day later.
To have further tests.
Yeah, exactly. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
So it wouldn't be a first. The other thing is that the Laval Rocket lost 2 forwards. I mean,
Simoneau's out for the year.
Is done for the year, and they lost also Jared Davidson for like 6 to 8 weeks, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to be short on offense. So it would be also for the Rocket, it would have been convenient to have Joshua Roy. And I mean, I mentioned it on Twitter last night, saying the Canadians are about to leave on a big trip, and they should. It would be a good time, considering that the Rocket also will be away for their next 5 games. So it would be fitting for them to send him down at this point. And people are saying, well, he deserves to stay in Montreal. Why don't they send down this guy, that guy, Josh Anderson, Raphaël Hervé-Pinard? I was like, geez, guys, come on. It's really just about.
Why are you even bringing that up?
Well, it's just because I don't know. People need to know that.
I know, but the people suggesting that they send Josh Anderson down.
They're not listening to our podcast.
Well, they're just not. They're not rooting. Well, first of all, there's a misconception about the trade deadline papering. It's not just to make players playoff eligible. It's to make them eligible to be sent down at any time after the trade deadline. Mm-hmm. So you can't send Josh Anderson down. You can't send Raphaël Harvey-Pinard down. If they have not been papered, they can't be sent down. That's my understanding of it. And so it's not – I always thought that just meant playoff eligibility, but apparently it's not. It's anything post-deadline. So the only 2 players they could send down are Joshua Roy and Jaden Struble, which I would do. I mean, I don't know. It's like –
well, because they have 2 extra forwards now with Colin White being back.
Exactly. And Joshua Roy I'm very curious to see what this stint in the NHL would do to Joshua Roy in the AHL and how dominant a player he might become down there. Because right now, he is a highly effective second-line winger for the Canadians. Like, a really effective. He might be a guy who benefits from the higher collective hockey sense in the NHL. That's my feeling, is that he can thrive in that environment because his hockey sense is so high, and that he reads well off other guys who think the game at the same level as he does, which you don't get as much in the AHL. But I'd still like, it would still be interesting to see. I mean, Laval only has 2, 4, 6, 7 games left. Am I reading that right?
No.
Oh, no. Sorry. That's just in March.
Wrong. That's in March.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So 7, 9, 11. They have 13 games left. 13. So, and they're all big games, and so I don't know. I feel Joshua Roy has made his point. He's cemented, in my mind, a spot on this team next season.
He's an NHL player.
His AHL days are over after this season, so you've established that. I think all the information that needed to be collected from Joshua Roy has been collected. All the information that he needed to collect has been collected. It's time to get Laval into the playoffs. I think it's very important for the organization that Laval plays in the playoffs. It's far and I think it's important to see Joshua Roy in that environment, in playing in meaningful games, and let's see what impact he has when he's being counted on to get a team into the playoffs, or help get a team into the playoffs at least.
Well, if he has that sort of impact at the NHL level, you could think that being sent down, he could become instantly their best player. And what if he was the one guy who, it remains a team game, so I don't want to say that he would carry the team in the playoffs. Certainly not single-handedly, but he would be probably the difference maker. Mm-hmm. If he was the difference maker to make this team make the playoffs, that would really be a feather to his cap, and something that could help him.
100%.
That could help propel his professional career.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think.
But again, it's not a matter of deserving it or not, because he would deserve to stay in the NHL.
It has nothing to do with deserving, and he understands that. He has understood that for weeks now. And we were talking about it on the last road trip. Like, how long is he going to stick around? And he's fully comfortable with the reality that he was papered and that he's going to go down at some point. And I just don't understand. I don't get why he's on this trip. I think he should have stayed home, and he should be playing for Laval as we speak right now. I think that's my thought. But
maybe they changed their mind.
Maybe, but I don't see why they would. I mean, it's less so tonight's game against Bridgeport than it is that game against Toronto on Sunday. Like that's really an important game for them, and I find it somewhat odd that Joshua Hall won't play in it. It's strange to me. But they do have, I mean, after that long break you mentioned, they do have, 2 games in Belleville, another game in Toronto. So this is an important stretch. Like after tonight's game, they got Toronto on Sunday, then Belleville on Friday, Belleville on Saturday in Belleville, and then in Toronto on Sunday. So that's 3 games in 3 nights. Belleville, Toronto, both teams that the Rocket are chasing, and I would be shocked if Joshua Hall is not playing in those 3 games by next Friday.
Yeah,
that would be strange to me. But this is already strange, but that would be stranger.
But they'll have reinforcements. But we'll discuss that after this.
Future Friday.
So that's the Future Friday.
That's the Future Friday jingle. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's add it. 5130. 5130.
So it's I think it goes. It's an easy discussion to have, especially on this day today, to have a Future Friday focusing on Reinbacher, because he's coming over. Earlier today, Olten lost their game. That if had they won it, it would have forced Cloton to play a play-out series against Ajoie. That would have delayed David Reinbacher's arrival in North America. Mm-hmm. But as it stands, he's going to be joining the Rocket in the coming days. So
yeah, the Canadians don't yet have a real beat on when that would happen, but they're hoping by early next week. So relatively soon, by early next week. And actually, the way the Rocket schedule is playing out, it's kind of an ideal spot for him to show up. They don't have a game until Friday. He can practice with the team for a few days. But speaking of players who would be expected to play in that 3 games in 3 nights, Belleville, Toronto, I think David Reinbacher might be one of those guys. And so it's a very...
He wouldn't play all 3 games, but right, they could insert him for 1 or 2 of those 3 games.
Exactly. To play one of those games or to be playing by then, I think is a reasonable thing. I mean, if the Canadians are hoping that he'd be here by early next week, I guess in a worst case scenario, he'd be here by the middle of next week. So let's see what happens. But it's a good development for David Reinbacher and for the Canadians that Olten, this second division series that went to 7 games between Olten and basically Zurich's farm team, like one of the only teams in Switzerland that has a farm team, finished with Zurich's farm team winning and Olten not winning. So basically the two teams that had applied for promotion to the National League both lost in their semifinal. Therefore, that Reinbacher and Cloton don't have to play this series, and Reinbacher's time in Cloton and this season in Cloton in particular comes to an end, and it couldn't have come a moment too soon because it's just been an unmitigated disaster from day one to now. And it's just, it's, I think, caused some anxiety for the Canadians, just how badly things were going over there. A lot of anxiety in the kid himself, which I can relate firsthand, that This was a very trying season for him on a personal level, on a team level, everything weighing, like just handling all the expectations on him, how famous he was suddenly. So many things that went through this kid's mind this year. So many coaching changes, and just utter chaos. Players coming, players leaving. It's just been a far from optimal situation. Had the Canadians known that this is what would happen this year in Switzerland, I am convinced that they would never have sent him back to Switzerland. Like,
No. The number, I mean, every media outlet that's covering the Canadians had an article at some point about the dilemma between Laval and Switzerland. And because there was, and it was just, I guess, a bit of second guessing, because it was clear in the Canadians' minds that they wanted to send him back to Europe.
But it wasn't for all the
himself was comfortable.
Yeah, I know, but I think by the end, Reinbacher would have been happy to go to Laval. Like, I think when he spoke to us at the Combine, when he spoke to media at development camp, at rookie camp, but I think over the course of that training camp, that changed. And he really liked the idea of being, he obviously wanted to make the Canadians. Like, that's step one. But I think he would have accepted going to Laval if the organization said, listen, we think it would be good for you to go to Laval. And the organization was afraid to send him to Laval. They did not want him in an environment where he would be exposed to public scrutiny and scorn, and everything that happened at the draft resonated a great deal with the Canadiens organization. Reinbacher himself has tried to move on from that. It affected him. There's no doubt. I remember I spoke to Vincenz Rohrer about it when I was over there, and he's like, he's a sensitive guy. Like, it was tough for him. That was a very difficult time. And even players now, I mean, Gouli brought it up. I didn't even ask him about it, and he brought it up, So I think in some respects, it was maybe good to want to protect him. In other respects, this is the reality of being a hockey player in Montreal. Better he learn it now and just get used to it, because this is his new reality. He's not going to be able to sit in a coffee shop for 30 minutes and have no one recognize him and no one come up to him. Like, those days are over. And so sooner he gets used to that, the better. And I guess he's going to probably get a dose of it in the coming days when he gets here. But, and I don't want to I thought it was a good idea to send him to Switzerland too. Like, let's just be clear. Like, I thought, based on what happened last season, it looked like, and it was a bit disconcerting speaking to Larry Mitchell, the GM of Cloton, and who was the coach at the time that I was there, saying that he really kind of took, I don't want to say offense, but he was a bit concerned that my story was going to focus on what a bad development year he had and how the environment there was bad for his development. And he really pushed back hard on it. And I get that. Obviously, he's the general manager. But
what part would he be pushing back on? I mean, to the fact that his team sucked?
Yeah, just the fact that it hurt Reinbacher development. That it hurt his development, because the fact that his team sucked hurt Reinbacher's development is what he was pushing back on. He didn't like that narrative, and he insisted that wasn't the case. And I was like, well, listen, would it not be? I mean, we all talk about developing in a winning environment. You guys, you can't win any games. Like, yeah, I understand that, but he's getting a lot of ice time. He's playing against top opposition. Listen, he made his arguments, but the part that it bothered me was that in making those arguments, he was like, if you look prior to the season, most of the experts who cover our league didn't have us making the playoffs. And I was like, what? Like, that's not a justification for like the shit show literally that's gone on in Cloton all year. No. He seemed to think like, oh, we're right where people expected us to be. Well, you shouldn't be basing that on. You shouldn't be basing your performance on. We
overperformed. We overperformed last year, and now we're back to normal. We're back to where we're meant to be.
Basically, what he was saying. So listen, it's they made a call.
Reinbacher.
What? Sorry.
Yeah, it's just that Reinbacher was playing top pairing minutes at 18 years old, which is something last year, which is something that almost never happens for a defenseman there, because they're allergic to young players. The top teams are making sure that they're going to they're winning because of their imports and their veterans. And the teams that are at the bottom, they want to make sure that they're not going to get relegated. So there's not much room for a young defenseman. So he did something that was incredible last year, being top pair guy at 18 years old. But you quickly realize, looking back at this season, the way it played out is that, so he kept his role at 19, but he himself was not enough to pull this team up. He needed some surroundings. He needed a team around him to help him make him better.
Yeah.
And that environment that the Canadians thought that was so positive and so good. Some people in management were very familiar with Jerry Fleming, the coach who got fired on November 18th. They thought that he was in a good place there.
Yeah.
But it really didn't turn out that way for him.
No, it didn't, and I don't think it was all bad. Listen, I think like a lot of the things that I mentioned, him going through, are things that he had to go through. Like let's be honest, like the guy's like this. He's probably like, it's going to take years and years and years for Cloton to have another guy that gets drafted in the first round of the NHL draft. Hell, it's going to take years and years and years for the entire National League in Switzerland. Like it doesn't happen. There's a defenseman in Zug right now, Leon Mugli. I don't know but he's. I think
I'm not pronouncing European names anymore. I got laughed at for the way I pronounce that.
You were so sure of yourself. That's what was so great about it. But anyhow, it's I think it's Mugli. Anyhow, he's kind of rated as like a second round pick right now. He plays for Zug. He plays a lot of minutes. Really interesting two-way defenseman, very similar to Reinbacher in that sense. Not as big as him, obviously, but he's kind of the next guy. And he might, depending on how things go for him in the playoffs and onward, could play himself up into like a late first round pick, and so, but generally this league does not have, there's another D in Zurich, actually, Daniil Ustikov, who could get drafted as well, but it's, and right around the same spot as Mugli, actually, or generally in the same area, but it's not something that happens commonly in this league. They're hoping it happens more often, but it's, right. So it was good for Reinbacher to experience what it's like to be a 5th overall pick. And doing it away from Montreal, I can see the benefit of it. Even though Cloton was such a disaster, I still think he would have benefited from being in Laval, and whatever scrutiny he was under would quickly kind of go away if he performed. If he didn't perform, it would have been difficult. I get that, and I guess that was a risk they weren't willing to take, because I'll say it till the cows come home, it's not easy for an 18-year-old to play in the AHL. I know people think it is, and that's what the AHL is for. I don't think it is. I don't think it's, and I think if you talk to peak coaches in the AHL, you talk to players in the AHL, they would agree that as being 18 in the AHL, even being 19, even being 20, is difficult. It's a tough league. Yeah. It's tough, and when you're a 5th overall pick and you're kind of the big upcoming star, you got a target on your back, and you're gonna deal with more of the rough stuff than you normally would. So, this isn't meant to. I don't want to second guess whatever happened with Reinbacher, but the fact is that he's finally getting out of Cloton and he's finally heading to Laval, and will be interesting to see how he helps the Rocket in their push to get to the playoffs and to be in a more positive environment than he's been in Cloton, for sure.
Yeah. Last season, there were 3 Europeans that were in the American League at 18 years old. There was David Jiricek, Shimon Nemetz, and Yuri Kulich.
Yeah.
So that's not a lot. And I think that there's never been more than 3 at a time in the last, 15 years or so. I want to shout out our friend Thibaut Châtel, who wrote a very interesting article about in his Substack about David Reinbacher's season. Thibaut is a data analyst. He's contracting for some teams in Switzerland, so he knows a thing or two about that league and watched plenty of David Reinbacher. And so he puts into numbers.
All of his games. checked every single one of his games this season. Yeah.
So he's. I think that it's really worth looking, for individual stats in particular when it comes to play building, shooting and passing, transition. There's an understanding there of what Reinbacher managed to do right despite what was going on around him. There are things, especially his transition numbers are great. Mm-hmm. And there's I'll just quote him. There's a part in his article that I thought was very interesting. He said that, so Thibault writes, on transition, he, Reinbacher, remained a top 20 percentile in the league for his ability to make controlled exits and one of the best for executing exits leading to a shot for Cloton, something very encouraging. We saw him starting the offense, then supporting the rush as often as he could, or trying many stretch passes directly reaching the offensive blue line. Mm-hmm. As a consequence, he reached the 66th percentile for control entries, something that was missing from his game last year. So there were signs that offensively things were picking up. It's the defensive aspects where he seemed to struggle more. So in that aspect, I'm really interested to see now that he's learning, now that he's growing more into his body. That was an issue, right? So there's the fact that he's getting bigger, heavier, the fact that he also had an injury that slowed him down. So in terms of mobility, he had an adjustment to make early on in the season. Yeah. Right. So, yeah, but the first one early on, it seems as though the hand injury was more significant than the knee. Yeah. Anyway, so I think that his last portion of the season in the American League, where he could just maybe come down to the basics, where not a lot would be expected from him, probably offensively, and it would be just about getting familiar again with the board battles, with clean exits, things like that. I think they would be good just to end on a positive note and be just familiarize himself with the North American game. With really, I would expect him to play, but I would not necessarily expect him to be a difference maker right from the get-go. I think that there might be a bit of a PTSD syndrome PTSD to shake off in his game before he gets impactful again.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to note that expectations should be tempered. But I'm working on something on the Swiss National League, and for those who think that he's coming from sort of this low caliber league, nothing could be further from the truth. Honestly, it's a league that I asked Mark Crawford about this. I don't feel bad. And he said that if they took the best AHL team and the best National League team and put them in Europe on the European ice, and they played a game, the best National League team would have a good chance of winning that game. He said if we played 7 games, probably the best AHL team would win, even on the bigger ice, definitely on the smaller ice, but it would not be a blowout. It would be a series. It would be tough. I'd probably lean towards the AHL team winning, but so that just to give you a sense, like he's not suddenly jumping into a league that's of a way higher caliber than the league that he's played in. It is higher, but it's not. The jump is not nearly as much as you probably think it is. So,
it's just a different style of play.
It's a different style of play, and obviously the quality of the team, quality of his teammates is going to jump a great deal. And so,
yes,
but the quality of the opposition is, he's going to have to readjust to the smaller rink, which I think we mentioned on a previous episode. He did a really good job of doing in rookie camp. By the time the main training camp started, he had pretty much adjusted to it. So we'll see. But yeah, I think you're good to point out that you should keep expectations under control here. And we'll see what happens. It's a challenge for JF Wool, and I think you wrote about it recently, and he's 100% right he has to play the kid. They're not bringing him over here so he can watch AHL games. He has to play them. And there are guys who have been scratching and clawing and battling all season on that team, some veteran AHL guys who might have to sit as a result. you know, and that's tough. That's a tough thing for a coach to have to do. And, you know, sort of a tough situation for Reinbacher to step into, where you're kind of taking this guy's job who's been playing all year. So it's let's see how it goes. But I think people should just keep an open mind and be ready for the possibility that he's going to struggle a bit, or it's not going to be spectacular right off the bat. That doesn't mean that he's a failed prospect, but it's clear that this season was far from ideal for a player picked number 5 overall, for sure.
So tonight against Bridgeport, on the right side of the Laval Rockets defense, you've got Logan Mailloux, Justin Barron, and Matthias Norlinder. So I could easily see
we could both see
Reinbacher coming in and taking Norlinder. Yeah, Norlinder could take a seat there. So
Norlinder,
interesting to see.
This might be Norlinder's last season in North America. I don't know if he's gonna. I don't know what kind of impression he's left this season. I'm not sure.
Well, he's certainly not. He has not developed the way that was hoped.
Is it Norlinder?
Remember,
he was on the right or Galipo?
No. Galipo's playing on the left. Norlinder's playing is offside.
Oh, okay, because the Laval Rockets, the lineup they put out has Galipo on the right. But anyhow.
Okay. Yeah. I was just looking at what our friend Anthony had posted, but you're right. It may be Galipo, but either one of them. I mean,
well,
it would be vulnerable to Reinbacher.
Like Galipo, Bisson, these are the types of guys that it's going to be tough for Hull to say, you got to sit, you know? Like those are the types of guys that's difficult for him. You know, I think Mailloux and Barron it's not happening. Norlinder is probably a little bit easier, but like I think the Galipo Bissons of the Rocket is what Hull is. They're kind of the heart and soul guys of that team, you know? So it's
especially Bisson.
Bisson.
Yeah.
But
so well, it's going to be interesting, and I mean Engström is starting his playoffs. We'll see if he comes over later on.
That's only a 3-game series, by the way. That could end very quickly. Because that's another play-in kind of situation for Rögle. So that could be, and that's the schedule for that. It's very quick. I think it's over the weekend. So by the end of the weekend, his season might be over, and he also might be heading over, depending on how things go.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, enjoy Calgary and have fun. I'm going to enjoy my weekend. I'm going to go see Dune this weekend. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening. We'll talk to you again on Monday. And so you'll be live you'll be in Edmonton by then. And so don't hesitate to send us your questions for our mailbag. If you like this podcast, don't hesitate to give it a 5-star rating on Apple. And you can also follow the SDPN channel on YouTube. So that's it. Those were my housekeeping notes for today.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll talk to you on Monday.